Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Our topics this week: Maine pushes back on Trump immigration enforcement by curbing cooperation between state and federal officers. An economic plan from one of the candidates for governor. How Senator Susan Collins sees herself and her legislative record during the Trump and Biden years. And looking ahead to 2026 with the pocketbook issues affecting Mainers most. My guests are Emily Cain, a Democratic former state legislator and congressional candidate, and the former head of Emily's List, a national fundraising group that supports pro-abortion rights women candidates, and Jason Levesque, the Republican former three-term mayor of Auburn and also former congressional candidate. Welcome. This week, Governor Janet Mills allowed an immigration bill to become law without her signature. LD 1971 imposes restraints on Maine law enforcement cooperating with federal immigration agents, unless there are formal agreements to do so. It'll prevent Maine police and sheriffs from detaining someone solely on the basis of a federal immigration-related request. As a practical matter, this won't take effect until next July 15th, or 90 days after the next legislative session adjourns. Mills saying in an op-ed published in the Portland Press-Herald, quote, despite promising to deport only the worst of the worst, those who pose a threat to public safety, President Trump has targeted all immigrants with a carelessness and cruelty that ignores due process, that ignites terror in our communities. About 80% of the people arrested by federal authorities in Maine this year, in some cases pulled into unmarked cars by masked men, have no criminal records. And on the other side of the debate, we have a statement from Senator Matt Harrington, who says that the law, he's the assistant Republican leader in the Senate. He says this law will tear apart relationships between local, county, state, and federal law enforcement in rural Maine, an area always overlooked by the ideological left. He says Maine police officers and Border Patrol regularly work together, keeping those communities safe. This decision is an absolute slap in the face to every law enforcement officer in the state of Maine. It's clear Governor Mills is more concerned with appeasing her progressive base with the primary than she is about the safety of Mainers. In addition, weighing in, we have the head of the Maine state's largest law enforcement union, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the head of the Immigrant Legal Advocacy Project, or ILAP.
I patrolled the northern area of Maine. I patrolled the borders. I know I have to have those people in my corner, and I have to be in their corner. Yesterday, Governor Mills literally put a stake down through the heart of our relationship with the feds.
This is really about rights, safety, and dignity for all Maine residents. LD 1971 is directly responsive to the federal administration's broad and indiscriminate mass enforcement and deportation campaign, which is having devastating impacts on Maine residents and workers and sending larger ripple effects throughout our state.
So that's what Governor Mills did. That's all the commentary on both sides. Emily, let's start with you. Did Janet Mills do the right thing?
Janet Mills not only did the right thing, this is what she had to do. We're looking at a situation where the rhetoric has become so hot, the President of the United States referring to Somali people living in America as garbage. And we're looking at a state, you quoted the stat yourself, with 80% of the arrests being people who have no criminal records. This is not how this is supposed to go. We all agree dangerous people should not be on our streets. We all agree with that, but this is the governor's way of saying we're gonna do right by Maine people, we're gonna lower the rhetoric, and we're gonna focus on really the bad people who are on our streets and not targeting families and making people feel unsafe in our communities and their homes.
Jason, sounds like Maine Republicans and some law enforcement leaders disagree.
Yeah, they do. You know, I do too. First of all, let me say, I'm a son of an immigrant who came here legally. Nobody's talking about legal versus illegal in all of this. First of all, I find it shocking that the governor who campaigned her first term for governor as a law and order, former district attorney, working with all sorts of law enforcement, federal, state, local, and so forth in order to combat crime. That obviously has not happened. And she really just sat on this bill. She should have vetoed it when it came across her desk, but she's using it for political gain. This is a calculated move on her end. It's not doing anything except appeasing her base in order so she can win a primary.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I mean, this bill came up at the end of session. I've been there for the end of session. There's a lot. What we know about Janet Mills is she is as thoughtful as they come, to an extent where she sometimes irritates her friends on the Democratic side of the aisle because she takes time, she thinks something through. She has a law enforcement background. She took this very seriously, and I think the very public displays of uncertainty, of fear in communities over the last several weeks and several months have led her to a place where this was the only option for her to make that was in the best interest of Maine people.
If it was so important, she should have done it right in the beginning. Okay, but she didn't. She sat on it. She wasn't thoughtful about it. It was about timing. She's trying to time it so she can get the best possible political bump in the polls, and she needs it.
She's trying to time it to make sure she makes the best possible decision, which is always Janet. I mean, people get frustrated with Janet because she takes her time. I think that's why she's been a great governor.
You know what? She has. I'll give it. She's taken her time with the economy. She's taken her time with affordability. She's taken her time, basically 8 years to move Maine backwards.
She's also taken time building the largest reserve in the Maine rainy day fund that really we've ever seen, because so Maine can be ready for what's ahead.
That's not going to put groceries on people's tables.
Staying with immigration, doesn't Jason have a point? I mean, I was at an event in Portland last night, in fact, where Graham Plattner was doing a panel with women, and he said at one point, ICE needs to be held to account for their behavior. I mean, there's definitely that sentiment in the Democratic Party, and certainly from her opponent, Mr. Plattner.
I mean, Janet is not one to pander to anyone, and I think that's why this week you saw advocates for the immigrant communities in Maine standing up and saying, good job. They also have been saying they were frustrated with her since the bill did not get signed at the end of session. So again, this is about Janet making the right decision, not the political one.
You're from Auburn, and there was a march last Saturday with hundreds of people, organized in part by the Somali community, which is strong there, though a lot of Somalis stayed home. I heard last night that many were scared. The organizer of the march was at that event I mentioned. What about the sentiments in Lewiston, Auburn about what Trump has said and whether this bill might counter that?
Sure. Obviously, I live it. I was mayor in Auburn. We deal with these issues. I will say this. This right now is just a continuation of what I like to call the nonprofit immigrant industrial complex. It's sort of like the military industrial complex, right? You have a group of immigrants. So this is a fairly new phase in our American history, if you would. In the last 30 years, have been promoted to and brought to America in order to prop up non-government offices, non-profits, in order so they could make money off their suffering. Of course, the Somalis and a lot of new recent immigrants have learned from that. I mean, they're actually learning on how to built the system. They're learning it from the best. So this has been going on for 30 years. Of course, we should expect them to go ahead and try to find every avenue, every way, just like the people who sponsor them, i.e. Catholic Charities of Maine, to make money and enrich themselves. That's what they know. And that's what's been going on. Historically, Irish, Greek, Italian immigrants didn't have that type of foundation, that type of nonprofit industrial complex that made money off their suffering. So they had to go out there and work, assimilate, and be part of the American dream. That's not happening right now.
That's a very creative rewrite of American history, and particularly the history of immigrants in America and in the state. I think we're looking at a place now where we're able to better support people who are seeking asylum and trying to escape very dangerous situations. I think you've seen, I know I've seen in Lewiston and Auburn, some very vibrant community adding to the community, adding to the richness of those communities. And I think that's what we want to see more of. Anyone who's committing fraud should be held accountable, period, full stop. But we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that expresses the same sort of compassion and pride in American values that immigrants who've been coming here for generations experienced.
We're out of time on our first issue. Thank you for that. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at one of the economic plans by someone who wants to be governor of Maine. In the Maine governor's race this week, Democrat Troy Jackson became the first candidate to propose a detailed economic plan. The fifth-generation logger and former state Senate president is promising a new contract with working Mainers, which he unveiled, flanked by supporters in Bangor.
Jackson's economic plan would cut taxes for working families, in part by doubling the earned income tax credit to $649 for individuals and $3,468 for couples with 3 or more kids. He'd lower prescription drug costs, including a cap on generic drug price hikes. He'd tackle housing affordability with down payment assistance, tax credits for renters, and surcharges on homes worth more than $1 million. And he'd lower child care costs so families wouldn't pay more than 7% of their income and get it free in a child's first year.
And one more note, in an interview with me, I asked Troy Jackson how he can reconcile his goal to upend the status quo when he spent 20 years in the state legislature.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to say I'm not the status quo, but at the same time, I'm the one with the most experience. And I get that, you know, but I am. I'm the one that's been in government by far the most. Why I'm the one that is because I'm the only one in this race that actually comes from a working class background.
So that's his pitch. By the way, if you want to watch the whole interview, it's on News Center Maine Plus. Jason, let's start with you. There's a lot of detail in there, a lot of ambition. What are some of your reactions to Troy Jackson's plan? I'm
glad you said ambition. Detail's a lot, it's lacking, but you know what? I understand that. In this stage of any election, it's going to be platitudes. It's going to be, higher thinking. Oh, this is what we want to do. But the fact is, he has been there for 20 years. He hasn't accomplished it, or really much of anything. If he did, he wouldn't be talking about it right now. He'd be really running on his record, which is non-existent. I will say this. He is on the right track, though. Childcare is critical. We need more children. Increasing or family tax credits for a larger family, absolutely important to do. But again, how do you pay for it? And you don't pay for it by adding more taxes on people with $1 million home. You're going to drive away the very people that actually fund and start your economy. So there's a lot of problems in this. But what I want to see, and really he should have been doing it for the last 20 years, is deregulating the housing market at the state level and local level. Talk about planning boards. Planning boards don't plan, they just stop projects. Yes, in his plan he talked about having a state board of appeal. You don't need that if you get rid of that. If you get rid of that whole process at the municipal level, which you can do, you got to take away the regulations. How did he vote on the new energy efficiency standards that went into effect in April of this year? That's really driving up the cost without any value whatsoever on efficiencies or energy consumption. There's just so much there that he's glazing over, or frankly just doesn't want people to admit or acknowledge.
Emily, what do you think? We should point out you're the treasurer of Hannah Pingree's gubernatorial campaign, but objectively as you can, Troy's plan.
Very objectively, and I've known Troy for 20 years, right? So what you see articulated here, it really details aside, is an articulation of the values you're hearing from all of the Democratic candidates for governor. You're hearing them talk about childcare, the cost of healthcare, prescription drugs, housing. I think really what it's going to come down to is as these policy positions are rolled out, which is an important tool in a campaign. It's an opportunity to get some press, be interviewed, and also articulate what you think you want to do, knowing full well you still have to get through the legislature to actually make it happen, and you have to fund it. But what we're seeing here, and I think what voters are going to be looking for, is not only who shares their values on understanding what the problem is, but who has a demonstrated record and a plan to actually get it done. And that's where I think there's going to be a need for deeper conversation in the coming months. Hannah rolled out a housing plan a few months ago.
$100 million housing
It was,
plan.
Absolutely. And just this week alone, you see both Troy and Hannah coming out with pushing for a public option for health insurance as Mainers face drastic increases coming down the pipeline here in the short term. But I think voters in the primary are going to, at some point, start to shift to not just who shares my values and understanding the problem, but who has a plan to actually get things done.
On housing, by the way, he wants down payment assistance on your home, Troy Jackson, something Rev. Shaw has also proposed. And Republicans have certain ideas for housing.
Right, because it's just glazing over the surface of the problem. They're not actually addressing the real reason, the cost of healthcare, housing, wrong topic.
Both.
But it's both. But we're talking about housing, right?
Yeah,
That's something I'm very intimately aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, Auburn is the fastest growing city in the state of Maine with over 2,500 units permitted in my 6 years as mayor. The problem is, or the solution is not throwing more money at it. Actually, it causes the problem. That's what we've been doing. When you have prevailing wages at the state level, prevailing wages are actually causing an unfair competitive advantage. So market rate homes, which are very, very important to the entire ecosystem, can't be built effectively, and they become stalled, and they just don't happen. So you can't have more of a reliance on government. You can't throw more money at this problem. You need deregulation. You need some guardrails, but you really need to look at what's driving up the cost of housing and then going from there. Everybody's missing that boat, really. And I've worked with Hannah, I worked with a lot of these folks that are running on both sides of the aisle on housing reform. And that's the one thing that they're not, either they're afraid or they can't grasp the problem and solution. And I'm hoping that they're just afraid of it, okay? Because if they are afraid of it, then we can address that. But if they don't understand what the problem is, then we need to find someone who does.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take another break. When we come back, a closer look at the record of Susan Collins. To a large degree, Maine's 2026 U.S. Senate election is about incumbent Susan Collins. Besides her seniority and being a member of the Republican majority, one of her arguments for a sixth term will probably go like this. The country needs more people in the ideological center, like her, who she says get things done. Collins is the only Republican in Congress from the 6 New England states, a significant shift from the region's bipartisan makeup when she joined the Senate back in 1997. She reflected on that recently.
I think that was much healthier. It was a much less polarized error. And it's important to have voices of people who want to solve problems. I'm not one who tends to rant and rave on certain news shows. Instead, I like to bring people together, search for common ground.
During the Biden years, Collins was the lead Republican sponsor on several major bills that became law, such as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, the Gun Control Safer Communities Act, and the Electoral Count Reform Act. And by the way, during the Trump first term, she voted with Senators John McCain and Lisa Murkowski to keep the Affordable Care Act. She brokered plans to end government shutdowns in 2019 and this year. And she authored the Coronavirus Relief Bill of 2020 and the well-liked Paycheck Protection Program. So, Emily Cain, Susan Collins frames herself as a centrist and a workhorse. How do you see it? Is she still vulnerable?
So there is nothing new in what you just said. That is how she positions herself. That is the story that she has been telling for a long time, and it has worked for her in elections. The question I have that I don't know the answer to yet about 2026 is that enough? Right? In 2020, we saw her in a tough race with former Speaker Sarah Gideon, and ultimately making that argument did win those middle of the road independent voters. They stayed with her, and she won that election. In 2026, where it seems to me that Donald Trump is actually the one controlling the United States Senate, not even the Republican majority there, where you see voters angry about the economy, frustrated that the ACA subsidies were not extended, so they're going to foot the bill with thousands of dollars in increases starting next month. I'm not sure that's going to be enough. And I think with a dynamic primary environment, with an experienced governor and a newcomer in Graham Plattner that is making waves all over the place, I'm not sure the typical playbook can apply, and I don't know where she pivots to from there.
Jason, what do you think?
Yeah. First of all, you have to live underneath a rock in the state of Maine if you haven't seen or been directly affected by something Senator Collins has done for Maine. In every community from Fort Kent to Kittery, she has been there. She's on the ground. She's helping when needed. Her effectiveness in the Senate and in Washington and in Maine is just, as you said, Emily, I'll paraphrase a little bit, unmatched. I mean, she's there. And has worked for her in past campaigns? Absolutely. Is Maine filled with pragmatic individuals? So yes, it is. So it will work again in 2026. And it's not about campaigning. I mean, this is her soul. This is her being, is service. I've had the privilege of knowing with her and working with her on a dozen community projects in the past, and she is right there. I mean, she is present. She works it. She has inspired leadership. In Washington, she has inspired leadership here in Maine. I would argue that she's done more for the state of Maine in the last 8 years as Governor Mills has done in her 8 years.
Emily?
You know, I've campaigned alongside the senator as well, right? And running for Congress in the 2nd District and running for the state Senate as well. There's no question she is everywhere. Again, people do feel like they know her. But when it comes to what people are facing, the unique combination of stress, of frustration, of anger at Washington on all sides for different reasons, I just think it's going to be an interesting opportunity and challenge for her and the talented people running against her to carve that path to victory, right? You are talking about a situation with a governor like Janet Mills, who has delivered time and time again for the people of Maine for good, who led us through COVID, who passed strong budgets, record investments in education. And then you have a newcomer like Graham Plattner, who, as you report, has been drawing crowds around the state and telling a different story. It's going to be a different kind of race in 2026, and there's no question that is the story that Susan Collins will tell. That is her story. I just don't know whether it will win.
Jason, briefly, is she an endangered species in her own Republican Party? She's not a MAGA Republican.
No, it doesn't matter. She's just a good person. And that's what Mainers want. They want good people. I will say it's really hard for someone to be in a chief executive role, i.e. governor, to go into a body which is supposed to be really toning down the rhetoric and more, friendly. I mean, Senator Collins sits down with Democrats. Obviously, it's been reported for many, many years now, as well as other Republicans. She is a bridge maker. When you're coming from that CEO type role as a governor, that's a really hard transition. And frankly, Maine does not have time, for someone to learn the job over the next 2, 4, 6, 12 years. It's not going to work out. What we do need is that steady hand, that proven effective leadership in order to guide Maine in this country forward.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll see what the polls are telling us about how the 2026 elections might turn. pocketbook issues decide elections, especially nationally, like when Reagan beat Carter, Clinton beat Bush, or when Trump beat Harris. A new report from the Maine Center for Economic Policy looks at a range of financial stress and regional differences affecting our state. I'm going to highlight two. Working only part-time or seasonal jobs. That's 30% of our workforce in Greater Portland, up to 41% in Western Maine. And earning less than a living wage. These are full-time year-round workers, according to MESEP, 30% of folks in Central Maine, up to 38% in Western Maine. And those data points echo findings in this month's Pan-Atlantic research poll of likely Maine voters. When asked about their top issues, Maine voters say they were, or are in this order: cost of living and inflation, healthcare access and affordability, housing and homelessness, high taxes, immigration, followed by education and drug addiction. And I asked the pollster, who told us, by the way, that 46% of Mainers believe their household finances are worse off than a year ago, compared to 14% who say they're better off. And here's what the pollster told me.
One additional data point that may help clarify that is that when you ask about what people expect their household financial situation to be a year from now, Democrats and independents continue to say they expect their financial situation to get worse over the next year. Republicans say that they expect it to improve.
I guess if you're a Republican and Republicans are in charge, you're more optimistic. Jason, what do some of these numbers tell you?
They tell me a lot. I mean, first of all, this is pretty common. Maine is an interesting state, of course. We do have a huge percentage of the population that work multiple jobs. We've been trying to solve it the wrong way over the last 8 years, by especially, let's look at Portland, implementing ever-increasing minimum wage hikes at the statewide level, increasing minimum wages and having an index for inflation. But at the same time, we're over-regulating, cost burdening's going up. There's a lot of factors that talk about affordability. We can only control so much at the federal level and the state level, but we have to focus in on that. So specifically, let's look at groceries. Let's look at heating oil. Let's look at the regulatory environment that's costing an increase in costs, on housing. There's a lot of different factors here. At the end of the day, the biggest leverage that the state government can have right now is lowering income tax. And not just lowering income tax for working class people, which I really can't stand that term, because I know a lot of doctors that work really hard. They're working class too. Just same thing as the server at my local restaurant where I get breakfast. We need to make sure that taxes are going down so people have more disposable income in their pockets. That's really the bottom line for this.
How do you see these affordability crisis numbers playing out in our three big races, Congress, Senate, and the governor?
Let's be honest, I'm very clear. Great report from MESEP. I did not need a report to tell me that people feel like they're being squeezed in this economy. Everyone I know is complaining about the cost of everything, whether they are a person with resources or a person with fewer resources and stretched budget. Everyone is looking at their bank account, especially as we head into the holidays right now, and saying, where is my money going? Everything is costing more, and it is frustrating. So when you say, is it going to be on the minds? I mean, it's going to be on the minds every day for voters heading into the new year. And I think what's interesting is I believe most voters are not yet paying attention to these campaigns. These campaigns are not communicating yet beyond getting on earned media. They're not spending money on TV, on radio, on mail yet to reach the voters where they are and tell their stories. But I think that the news of people think the economy is tough, it's not really news, it's just reality.
Right, so one more comment from each of you briefly to sum it up. Doesn't bad economic news play badly for incumbents?
Bad economic news plays badly for everybody. Someone said, I can't remember who it was, a recession is when you lose your neighbor loses their job. A depression was when you lose your job. Okay, and that's the difference. It's very, very household centric. Of course, the economy is going to be bad for the incumbents. But it's not just the federal incumbents. We're talking the state incumbents. We're talking local incumbents. Local folks in Auburn or Lewiston that have been raising taxes, or Portland that have been raising taxes and raising the cost of going out to eat, are going to feel this, or they should feel this, when people, to Emily's point, start paying attention. The governor should feel this. Troy Jackson should feel this. People that have been in power in Maine should feel this in a negative way.
So Washington Republicans maybe have more pressure, but Maine Democrats who are in charge may have more pressure.
I think there's both challenge and opportunity for everyone in this, right? The challenge is to explain whether or not you've played a role in what you could have done to make it better sooner. The opportunity here is to say what you're going to do and how you're going to deliver it. Because I believe in 2026, it will not be enough, as I said earlier, to just share the values of the frustrated voters. It's going to be who has an actual plan to deliver results and make real change, and that is the person who will win the hearts and minds of Maine voters, especially in primaries.
Emily Cain, Jason Levesque, we're out of time. Thank you very much. That's
Thank you.
all for this
Happy
week.
holidays.
This week's Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Thanks for watching.